As I thought about what to talk about to CEOs, and as I talked to Steve about what this group is, I ran a public company for 17 years, but I don't think that's going to be particularly relevant to most of you out there. And then I thought about the growth and what we had in medical devices, but again, you're not medical device people generally, and so I don't think that's relevant. So what I always found the most useful to me when I was hearing a talk was when a CEO would talk about the troubles they had. Talking about successes is easy and fun, but what happens when the S hits the fan? And what lessons did you learn as you went through there? So what I've titled this, and for the next 25, 30 minutes, what I'm going to talk about and then open it up to questions, is the CEO lessons I learned really the hard way, because that's the way that you learn most of your lessons. It's not through having fortunate developments or having positive things happen to you. It's when something happens bad and what you have to do to correct it. And that's the mark of a really good CEO. So let me go back in time and talk to you about who I am and what I went through and tell you the story. And then I think you can pull some lessons out of there. And then I'll conclude with 6 lessons that I learned that I think are relevant to development stage company CEOs. So my background, I'm a native Minnesotan. I was born in the 1960s in Northeast Minneapolis, where I think I was a pretty cute little kid back then. My family moved across just about a mile away from Northeast Minneapolis to St. Anthony Village, so I could get into high school there and went through there. We used to call that Polish Edina, if you will. Thought we were kind of special. In the 1980s, after graduating high school, I went to the University of Minnesota, both for college and for law school, where I do have to confess that I did commit a crime. That is felony impersonation of hockey bear right there. I was not a hockey player, but I tried to look like one. Graduated from law school, wanted to be a corporate lawyer, wanted to stay in Minneapolis, so I took a job at Dorsey and Whitney, which at the time was the largest corporate law firm in the state. And you know what I had to do? I sold out and cut my hair. And after 5 years of working at Dorsey as a corporate lawyer, I really thought that I wanted to take the next step. I wanted to become the business person, not bill by the hour, but actually try to build the business. And the step for me to do that was to jump into a corporation. And so I took a job offer at a small medical device company called ATS Medical that we had just taken public, where I was the general counsel. And for the next 6 years in the 1990s, I went from doing just the legal work to learning everything I could about medical devices, from the development to the marketing, to the sales, to the regulatory, going on sales calls, anything I could in order to figure out how medical device companies should be organized, run, and grow. And so in 1997, I thought I was ready to take my shot at the golden ring. I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I wanted to be a medical device entrepreneur. So I left ATS Medical and I started Vascular Solutions. And I had absolutely everything I needed to start a successful medical device company, except 2 things. I had no money and I had no medical device. But other than that, I had everything else covered. So, the big thing was the device, right? What was I going to do? And I found a cardiologist out in California who had the idea for a sealing device that would be used after an angioplasty to seal the puncture in the femoral artery in the groin that's created when you're delivering stents up into the heart. Called it the Duet because it had 2 components, a biologic and a catheter. And it's 2 T's with the Duet because we named it in Germany after doing our first human cases in the German beer hall. And that's how you spell Duet in German. For the money part, I didn't have any money. I had only $300 to invest. That's what I started it with. But I was a lawyer. And so I could put together a private placement document, use my connections, try to get out there and hire some people I knew. And so this is the core group that we started with in February of 1997 with $1.5 million in the bank, a core group of people to make that idea into a product. I'll quickly cover the next 15 years on this slide, really kind of giving you a flavor for what we went through before I jump into some details. But that 1.5 million for a medical device company, even back then, that's not enough to get you onto the market. That was just enough to get us from proof of concept into a human use product. For the next 2 years, in order to get through the FDA, we needed to raise $24 million in venture capital. And we did that in 1998 and 1999. Then we got FDA clearance and we had to raise more money to create a nationwide sales force to sell that product to the doctors. We did that in 2000 with a $48 million IPO. And then our first 6 months as a public company, the stock market exploded up, was over $20 a share in a stock price. And everyone thought we were the next darling child of medical devices in Minnesota. And then all of a sudden, a big competitor, St. Jude Medical, here locally, acquired a competitive product, and made a couple improvements, and they grew their share of the market from 30% up to 80%. And that 80%, part of that was supposed to be mine. And I could not change my product to make it work. So I looked at it, and we were doing 12 million in sales, losing 15 million a year. And we were going to run out of our IPO money in the next 2 years if we didn't do something to change. So early on, only 6 months as a public company, I went back to the board and said, we need to change our business plan. This product will never get us to profitability. We need to look at additional products to add to it, harvest the duet, find and develop new products, and create a profitable public company that way. The board voted, we discussed it, they agreed, and then they said, go tell Wall Street. I told Wall Street, and Wall Street responded by taking our stock price down 70 cents. Not by 70 cents, but from $20 to 70 cents. And at that time, I learned a lesson, is that if you're going to have bad news, you develop it early. You get on top of it. One of my board members said, remember, bad news is not like wine. It does not get better with age. And then the second lesson there is, if you're going to go through a rough patch, you need to have a personal connection with each critical employee in your organization, so those people stick around. Not just employee talks, not just groups, but you need to go through everyone in your organization. At this time, we had about 250 people. Figure out who are the critical employees and make sure they're on the same page with you, and they're on it, and they're going to develop the plan that you're calling. If you don't do that, there's bad things that are going to happen afterwards. And we lost about 75 of those 200 employees over that next year as they found better jobs, but the core group was still there. Over the next 2 years, we developed 3 more products from ideas we created or we found, created them into medical devices and got them launched. And our sales went from 12 million up to 20 million. And the stock price jumped back up to $6 a share because we were not at risk of going out of business. The next 3 years, we continued to develop 5 new products each year, but we were still losing money. No one really cared about us. We were too small. And so the stock price stayed roughly equivalent. By 2009 or 2007, we got another new product approved. CNBC Power Lunch, the nationwide TV show on stocks, mentioned this new product, which was an insignificant product, but they mentioned it. And in one day, our stock went from $6 up to $14 and 20 million shares traded, which is quite impressive since we only had 12 million shares outstanding. But that kind of optimism, which was unfounded, which I could do nothing to stop, gave me a headache and a hangover for the next 2 years as people realized that that product was not going to be our savior. But by 2011, we had launched over 50 new products. We had over 70 million in sales. We had grown our sales by greater than 10% each of the last 10 years, and we had just crossed into profitability. And I thought, that is escaping a near-death experience. We had kept the team together. We had kept our money where it needed to be. We developed the products, and we got to the promised land. And that is exactly the time that my real troubles began. You see, I was in the Minneapolis airport flying out to Boston to talk to investors. And it was almost exactly 10 years ago today that I was there. I was at the Ben & Jerry's because when I'm not traveling with my wife, I like to have the ice cream cone without her reminding me that I'm gaining weight. And so I was eating my ice cream cone when I got a phone call from my assistant at the office. And she said, Howard, we just received a subpoena. I said, well, that's not unusual. I mean, people send subpoenas on collection actions or whatever. I mean, what's the client? What's the law firm? I said, now, Howard, this is different. This subpoena came from the United States attorneys. In fact, the Department of Justice and the U.S. attorney in San Antonio. I said, well, that's unusual. I've never really seen that kind of thing before. Who are they investigating? And he said, no, Howard, I read the subpoena. They're investigating Vascular Solutions and you. And, oh, by the way, this is a federal criminal investigation. The first thing I heard about this was a subpoena from the criminal division of DOJ investigating me and my company for committing healthcare felonies. Well, I still got on the plane. I flew out to Boston. I came back. And the 4th of July weekend, I spent in the office trying to figure out what this was all about. What I realized when I dug everything into it is that this subpoena was based on a rogue salesman that we had in our organization. You see, we had about 60 salespeople. They got together in regions. They had 6 regions of about 10 each. And every 6 months, they'd get together for a regional sales meeting. The West region had their regional sales meeting of April 2008. in the Holiday Inn in Burbank, California. Now, I promise you, nothing good ever happens in a Holiday Inn in Burbank, California. And nothing good happened there this day. You see, one of our sales reps got up and gave a presentation called Treating Perforator Veins an Easier Way, something he had created. His father was a physician. His father gave him the information, and he presented it. Never brought it to the home office, never ran it by us, never did anything to clear it through marketing. And while we had clearance to sell our product to treat all varicose veins, this specific varicose vein is something we were not promoting at the time because we wanted to get a specific indication. So it gets lost in the details. But the important thing was a salesperson told 9 other salespeople about a way of using one of our products in a way that the FDA did not like. And this is what the Department of Justice thought was a nationwide conspiracy to sell one of our medical devices that was FDA cleared off-label for the treatment of perforator veins. Well, you might be questioning, well, how did that become this big deal? I mean, why was this a DOJ investigation? They're not hanging out at the Holiday Inns. Well, it got there the way that all these things get started. And this is something for everyone to be aware of. It started with a whistleblower. One of those other 9 sales reps in the room was someone who eventually didn't like me and didn't like the company. And he was going through some personal troubles. So he went to a lawyer, and the lawyer said, if you create an allegation that your company has done something wrong, we can file a qui tam lawsuit, which is in the name of the government. And if the government gets any money out of Vascular Solutions, you'll get 25%. So they created a tale around this presentation and then filed a lawsuit claiming $20 million related to a product that we had grand total sales over 5 years of only $500,000. But this was a way for him to try to get $5 million in order to turn his life around. Well, okay, that's a civil lawsuit. So why was that subpoena a criminal subpoena? I didn't know that at the time, but I learned later is that the DOJ has a policy. It's enumerated later on. It was written down in this memo called the Yates memo after Sally Yates, who was a U.S. attorney for a little while in the last administration. In it, they say this: if civil attorneys believe that an individual identified in the course of their corporate investigation should be subject to a criminal inquiry, that matter should promptly be referred to criminal prosecutors. So our whistleblower filed a lawsuit. It got to the civil lawyers in DOJ in San Antonio. They went across the hallway, gave it to their criminal cohorts. They looked at it and said, this is the allegation we want to pursue on a criminal basis. Stand down, civil people. We'll take it from here. And that's how that subpoena got on my desk. Well, it started from there, and it started a big, long investigation. And you might be thinking, well, if it starts, you can just end it. Just give them what they want, settle no matter what the thing is, and you'll be done with it. This was the settlement offer, the best settlement offer we ever got right before I got indicted. We had to agree to pay a 7-figure fine, which would be, say, rounded up, $10 million. Fine. I would have paid that just to be done with this because I had a business to run, and this is a serious, serious risk to our ongoing activities. But there's more. We had agreed to remediation, which means a corporate integrity agreement, some kind of corporate monitor, other kinds of things for at least 5 years. Fine. I would do that. Anyone would do that just to get away from getting criminally indicted. But there's more. We had agreed to terminate myself and 2 of our sales reps, and then discipline 3 other employees for what the DOJ thought was inappropriate conduct and not agreeing to their demands. On top of that, I had to plead guilty to misdemeanor misbranding, a crime, which would exclude me from my company and exclude me from healthcare. And then they said, you can go over our heads to our superiors, but your pleas would fall on deaf ears and would be a total waste of time as the push to charge Howard is coming from above. Now, I never would have thought that Washington, D.C. Department of Justice would be after me for running a little old medical device company in Minnesota. But as it turned out, as I got into this, that's exactly what they wanted. They wanted an example of a business person who they thought was doing something wrong, and they weren't going to give up unless I pled guilty and admitted to their theory. Well, it wasn't true. So I was going to fight, and the board agreed that we were going to fight, even if it meant getting criminally indicted. And that's what happened. Because in the criminal justice system, if a prosecutor wants to charge you with a felony, if they want to indict you, they can. Everyone gets indicted if a prosecutor wants that to happen. They call it a ham sandwich indictment because a prosecutor could indict a ham sandwich if that's what they wanted. And in fact, you get indicted twice when this happens. So if you ever get involved in a criminal allegation, you get indicted once on the legal side, and the second time you get indicted in the court of public opinion. because the Star Tribune picked up the indictment and the front page lead story, not the business section, the overall paper was that I was accused of conspiracy. They couldn't explain what it was. It was adulterated and misbranded medical devices, which didn't harm any patient, was approved by the FDA 8 times, but the conspiracy is what they led with. And then you know that everyone who knew you from when you're in elementary school, high school, college, law school, working as a lawyer or as a business person is going to think Howard Root, felon, as long as this case continues to proceed. And it'll proceed for years. In my case, it was 15 months from the date of the indictment until we get into court where I could prove that I was innocent. We got into court. We had a good team of lawyers. The government's case completely fell apart. And after they presented their case, we rested. We didn't call a single witness. We went to closing arguments. And after a short deliberation, the jury came back not guilty on all counts of me and the company. Well, what's the cost of that? What happens here? If you get involved in this situation, what are you going to go through? There's 2 costs. One is there's the cost of the process, and it can be small and minor if it's just an allegation, or in my case, it was major. You see, we had over 50 employees and customers who were interviewed by the prosecutors, and I use interview in quotes because interviewed is not what they did. They really tried to get them to admit that we were a criminal operation. Each one of those employees and customers needed legal representation, and it was in our best interest to have the company pay for that. So we hired 121 lawyers at 14 different law firms to represent all the people in this process, and that cost us over $25 million over the 5 years. Well, if we're convicted, the second part of the cost would come in. If we were convicted, I would have spent at least 36 months in prison for that crime of selling an adulterated medical device. On top of that, we would have been excluded, the company and me, from selling any medical device to any US hospital for the next at least 5 years. Vascular Solutions would have been shut down. We would have had a garage sale to sell our products individually or wholly to some medical device company, and I would have been forced to retire from medical devices for the rest of my life. I asked our lawyers, what is the odds of getting an exoneration? How many people have been accused and indicted of a crime like this and have walked out of the courtroom completely innocent? And my lawyer said, in the last 10 years with this judge, it has never happened. You're the first case of that, because everyone eventually breaks and pleads guilty to something, even if they haven't done it because they either run out of money or they can't take the punishment of the process any longer. Well, my response when I was through with all this, even though I loved medical devices and I love Vascular Solutions, well, I wrote it in an article and I got it published in the Wall Street Journal. And the first sentence was really everything about it. I quit. After I realized what was happening and what could happen and what could happen again, I just decided that I needed out. I said this: the reason I sold my company and ended a career I loved is to avoid the risk of being criminally prosecuted under the federal government's responsible corporate officer doctrine for the second time. You see, I was never accused of doing a crime. I was accused of being the CEO of a company that had a salesperson that had committed a crime. So therefore, I had no ability to prevent this from happening again. I managed 100 salespeople. If you've never managed 100 salespeople, think 100 teenagers. And if one of those teenagers does something wrong, you'll be accused of a crime and potentially go to prison for 3 years. It's not something you're going to want to sign up for. And at that point, at the age of about 55, I decided that's it. Well, here's where the story gets, I think, a little bit more applicable to everyone in the audience, because at that point, we had to decide what to do. Do I turn this company over to the next CEO or do I sell it? And turning it over to the next CEO just wasn't a good option. We'd gone through a stressful time. We had some people who might be able to do it, but the company was made to suit my management style and my personality. And it would be a complete reset before the new person could establish it in their personality and take it to the next level. So the board and I, together, decided that it was time for us to sell the company rather than just have someone else run it from there. So that was in July of 2016. The trial was over in February of 2016. I took the next 3 months to clear my head. I came back in July, the board meeting in July, and I told the board, I want to sell the company. I want to be out. At that time, we turned to our investment banker. Now, we had not done an investment banking transaction since our IPO. So we had no established relationship. But in that period of time, I made sure that I knew who were the people who could potentially sell the company if that ever came to happen. I had pre-qualified our advisors. So that when we made the decision in July of 2016, I could call the advisor the next day. These people already knew my business. We put together the disclosure document and they contacted parties, 13 parties in particular, in order to see if they were interested in buying this company merely 2 months later. From there, in October, the next month, we've got interest from 5 companies who signed non-disclosure agreements, who went ahead to the next level to look at whether they wanted to buy Vascular Solutions. From then, we asked for bids in December, and we only got one bid. That was from Teleflex. Now, I thought we wanted to get multiple bids so we could have a bidding war, right? But because our stock price had moved up so much, most of the other companies said it might be a little bit too rich for them. They didn't want to pay that much for the assets, but Teleflex did. And so I said, how do we get this price to go up? And my investment banker said, for a bidding war, all you need is one bidder and a mirror. You show that mirror to the bidder, and then you get that bid to go up. And they did that a little bit. And by February, we closed that sale by selling Vascular Solutions to Teleflex for $56 a share or $1 billion in aggregate consideration. Well, at that time, I was around 56, and my wife, who loves me, said she wanted to be around me, but not for lunch, that I needed to find something else to do. So I decided that I'd do something smaller, much, much smaller, something more of a business hobby. And so I knew a guy, I live out here in Lake Minnetonka. I knew a guy who had fixed my boats and he had some ideas. And we decided we would create a new company to do electric boating. So we created Elux Marine, which stands for Electric Luxury Boating. We made this boat, which is more of a hybrid pontoon catamaran. And then in the next year, we made a more standard pontoon. So from 2018 to 2020, I was playing in the boating market. And what I realized, which is what I knew beforehand, is if you do a business hobby, you have either a bad business or you have a bad hobby, because you either have to spend so much time in it in order to destroy your desire for the hobby, or you don't spend enough time in it to make it a good business. And after doing that for 3 years, we sold 3 boats in 1 year. And the next year we sold 10 boats, electric lithium battery powered boats. I decided that it needed to grow. And to grow, I wasn't going to hire it or manage it or invest in it. I needed to sell it. So much quicker than Vascular Solutions, I sold Elux Marine 3 years after we started it to another company doing a similar activity, Pure Watercraft out of Seattle, which is making an electric outboard that can be applied to any pontoon or any boat at all. And in this case, standard Bass Pro Shops pontoon boat. So what I learned there is it's fun to deal with things, but you have to have an exit strategy. And the exit strategy can be sale and it can be growth. But if it's your hobby and you're not going to grow the business, you need to get out early, not later, because otherwise you can encounter problems or you get sucked in too much where you're spending all the time on your next full-time business. So that's kind of a quick review of my story. And I really, from that background, I want to leave you with 6 things and then take your questions, but really 6 lessons I learned the hard way during my 20 years at Vascular Solutions and my 3 years at Elux Marine, really primarily the Vascular Solutions part. The 6th most important lesson as I looked at it is that there are many consultants and advisors out there who will help you. I saw them all the time. The bigger I got, the more they called. And they would help you. And they'd have good pitches. They had good backgrounds. There's a lot of things they could do. But if we hired all of them, we'd have advisors and consultants all around the place. So you can't do that. And you have to figure out which ones you want to hire. And so you give them a credibility. Minnesotans tend to think that people know what they're doing. They're going to come in and help you. If you do that, think about it this way. Many consultants and advisors out there will help you fail. If you take their advice and you do what they tell you to do, you probably will fail and it will be with their assistance. Let me give you one example. When we were going through the dark times, one of my board members, a venture capitalist, said, it'd be good for you to get an advisor to come in here and look at what's going on from a human resources standpoint. I agree, that's fine. He had someone he'd used before. It was not in Minnesota, it was out in Portland, Oregon. So they come in. And the first thing they do is sit down with me and they talk to me about their process, which is involved. They interview all of the employees who report to me and the next level below that. And then they come back to me with a report of what they think I should do. So they did that. They took two days to go through and interview each one of my direct reports and each one of the operational heads. Now, they didn't talk to me before that about what I thought about this, what my plan was. They read a background document, but they didn't really understand my unstated vision. They just knew what these employees said. And they came back to me and they gave strong recommendations. Those recommendations were I needed to focus on Wall Street because we're already a public company then, and let my operators run the business. So I needed to take a step back and let them decide what they needed to do and how they needed to do it and how much money was needed to do that. And I needed to go and just be the bank in order to get that money, talk to Wall Street, get our stock price back up, and then finance everything that these people said they wanted to do. Now, I don't want to be too harsh, but the employees I had running it, a couple of them were not experienced in really top level management. I was grooming them into that area. And we were going through a hard time. So they were starting to think there must be a simple way out. If I had taken that advice and stepped back, they would have done what they wanted to do. And then they probably would have left. And then I would have been left with a mess. I considered that and I decided, no, we're not doing it that way. I'm going to be intimately involved with all of the details. I joke, but it's partly true. I'm not a micromanager. I'm a nano manager. When we get into the things that are important that affect the company, like how we're going to develop products, I wanted to be involved in the details. And that's the way Vascular Solutions grew from nothing up to $1 billion. So we did that. A couple of the employees didn't like it, they left. Other ones really loved it because they could get direct input immediately. We didn't dance around things. But if I followed the consultants and advisors' advice, I would have failed. Now for you, you're probably not like me at all. You just need to find consultants and advisors, not who tell you what you want to hear, but who tell you a message that you understand and fits with the way that you want to operate your company. Because if it doesn't fit and you don't understand it, then it's not going to be useful advice. So you got to find the right advisor. In particular on that, the time to qualify an advisor is long before you need them. Now, my example there is the investment banker that sold the company. If I had to start at the time that we decided to sell the company fresh and interview all the investment bankers out there, it would have taken me 6 months. We could have missed our window. I needed to have that person in place, knowing me, knowing our team, knowing what we were doing long before that. We didn't pay them a dime for that. They want to do this business development. They want to come out there. It applies not only to investment bankers, it applies to lawyers, applies to accountants. If you think you need the next step in outside consultants, the time to do that is at least 6 months before you're going to hire that firm or that person, because then you can really not make the mistakes. You can get involved. You can check everything off and not do the standard thing that all successful people do is once they get a decision, it's done and move on to the next one because there's too much else to do. So thinking about what you need for advisors, whether it's legal, accounting, investment banking, financing, whatever, long before you need them and making sure you have that person that you are comfortable with that's going to be part of the team to take care of that part of your business. Number 4, build your business not to sell it, and then it will be easier to sell. Now, this comes from what we did at Vascular Solutions. When I started in 1997, there were a bunch of other medical device companies. And a lot of them had the philosophy of, we're going to develop it to a certain stage, and then we're going to sell it to Medtronic or Boston Scientific, and they're going to take it from there. And that's exactly the message that the CEOs would communicate to their employees. Now, when you did that, the culture changes immediately in the company. They don't think they're going to launch this product. They don't think they're going to be there for the whole long-term thing. So as a result, the hard little details sometimes get ignored. They view it as the next owner's problem. What we need to do is just get this done, make it look good. Then the buyer comes in and then we get out. And we don't have to worry about doing the hard work because we're not going to be here to see the results of that. If you have that philosophy in an organization creep in, then you're not going to achieve the milestones. And you can, quite honestly, fail easier by not paying attention to the details. On the other hand, if you build it not to sell it, if you say, we're going to be here for the long term, we're going to develop everything. We're going to make it work as a profitable company. If you can do that, then not only will you have a stronger business and the details are being paid attention to, but it also will be easier to sell because the businesses that come in and buy these companies want to see something that's already functional, that requires a minimal amount of change in order to be successful within the larger organization. So if you think about it that way, if you want to sell the company, don't talk about selling your company. Don't plan to sell the company. Plan to be independent. And then it'll be easier to do it. We had in the 20 years 5 different offers of companies unsolicited coming in to buy the company. And each time it was just below what the board wanted, and we just turned them away. No, until we got to the point where we decided that we wanted to sell. And at that point, all those 5 people were on our list. We called them and said, okay, it's time for us to sell. And the process went very quickly and very smoothly because we had built it not to sell, but we kept track of who they were, who wanted to buy us. That made it much easier for us to sell the company. Number 3, Be thorough in hiring employees. I see this all the time with people who give the HR function, just go check these people, or they don't check at all. They don't even do a check of social media. They don't do a check of legal records. The whistleblower that started this whole mess, he got hired by 2 other medical device companies after he left us. If they just Google his name, they would have seen this. And I'm not saying don't hire them. I'm saying be aware of everything. Check things out, because these issues where someone comes into an organization with other motivations, other ideas of what they want to do with their job, come up all the time. And the easiest way to avoid it is to be thorough in hiring employees. Now, I'm not saying be slow, because you can do a thorough check of employees' social media and a legal check in an hour. It may be 2, but it doesn't take you days. So just make sure you have that process for any important hire that you make, and therefore you'll avoid a lot of the hiring mistakes that we had to make before there was even the internet. We couldn't do it as easily as you can now. We had to do reference checks and credit reports. You don't have to do that. You can go out and look at their Twitter, and you look at their Facebook. You can go do a legal search online that's free, and you can find out if there's a problem with that potential employee. The second half of that is, and be quick to fire them if necessary. Now, someone told me a long time ago is they never look back and thought, I wish I had not fired that employee. If they fired an employee, they almost always look back and said, boy, I wish I had the guts to have done that earlier. And the reason they don't, no one wants to fire someone. They want to make it work out. But it gets to a point, not to be quick on the trigger, but someone who's able to see if something's not working, realizing it's not going to get better, and making a change in as clear a way, as an upfront a way as is possible. That's what you need to do. But you need to be quick about it. Because once you make the decision that someone's going to be gone, or you think it's not going to work out, or it isn't working out, untoward problems can happen. In my case, the whistleblower was a problem child for quite a while. It was well below my level, but it was something that if I'd really looked into, I would have said, this person probably shouldn't be here. Let's give them a severance and get them out of the organization, and then we'll move on. But if we didn't do that, that's when these kind of problems can appear. 2, succession rarely works, and anointed successors almost always fail. I think other business people tell you the same thing. If you build the company for you to run it, then the next person's not going to be you. They're not going to run it your way. And your strengths are not going to be their strengths. Your weaknesses probably won't be their weaknesses. They're going to need different support around them to do what you did. So in order to have a succession work, you have to gradually pull back. But at the same time, the business has to continue. It's a very difficult process in any organization where it's a CEO-led organization. The founder is in charge. That is going to be a very transition to make. The way to do it, though, is if you're going to do it, is to wait until the decision has to be made, then decide who's going to be the successor. In our case, because of this indictment, at any time I could be required to be thrown out of the company. So we had to have a CEO in waiting. I had to anoint a successor at the time I got indicted, and I did that. And as soon as I did that, and then I was pulled off into the legal role, that person started to act as the CEO. Not only telling employees that, but telling customers that he was going to be the next one to run Vascular Solutions. Anointed successors, the prince, the king in waiting, if you will, is a bad situation for any organization to have, especially if the CEO is occupied with other activities. So anointing a successor should happen only when that plan is being put in place. That is, the succession begins that day. You don't anoint someone and then hang around and wait for the decision of when that's going to start. It starts the day the appointment as a successor is announced. Then first, most important lesson that I've learned, compliance allegations will hit you. I never thought I'd be at risk. I mean, I was an Eagle Scout who taught Sunday school. I never had an allegation of any inappropriate conduct at all in my business career. And all of a sudden I get accused of being a felon. Those allegations, maybe not that serious, happen to every business person. And you have to be ready for it. You can't be shocked by it. You can't be surprised by it. It can hit you anytime, anywhere, for any reason or no reason at all. And you have to be ready for it when you least expect it. I had spent all that time getting our company and our business from really on the verge of failure up to where we were at the verge of success. And at that time, that's when a compliance allegation hit me that caused me to spend $25 million and 5 years of battling the federal government. Now, if you're not ready for that, if you don't have that ability to really deal with something, probably not that serious, but at least something that you're ready for, that you can address, then you're always at risk of being destroyed as a business. And so as you're growing and as you're paying attention to the products, the services, the customers, you also have to be very concerned about compliance, because if you're not ready for it when it hits you, it can sink your entire company. So that's the 6 CEO lessons that I learned the hard way. And with that, I'll kind of stop there and open it up for questions.